The cabin was hollow, the silence left behind by the wagon's departure ringing louder than the winter wind. Joshua stood in the center of the room, the hearth still radiating a ghost of the morning's warmth. He didn't have much time. The scouts were waiting for him at the edge of the cedar swamp, but there was one debt left to pay before he shed his English life entirely. He walked to the heavy oak chest in the corner, the one his mother, Mary, had brought with her across the sea. He pulled out her leather-bound journal, the book that held the lineage of the Tefts, the Dutch families of her youth, and the verses she used to steady her soul. He placed a hand-written letter to her somewhere between the pages. Joshua loaded the heavy Hope chest onto a wagon heading to Aquidneck Island and gave the order of delivery to the driver. The last words of a son. Joshua sat at the table where he had once carved initials into wood. His hand, steady and calloused, dipped the quill into the last of the ink. "I am staying because this land is Peter's blood and bone," he wrote, the candlelight flickering against the parchment. He wrote of the loving strength he had inherited from John, a strength that didn't just build fences, but allowed a son to wander into the woods and find a different kind of truth. He wrote to his mother of the Bible lessons that now fueled his resistance. "Greater love hath no man than this." He didn't write as a rebel or a traitor. He wrote as a son who had finally found the place where his two worlds met, in the soil that held Sarah and the future that belonged to Peter. The hidden vow. When the ink was dry, he folded the parchment small. He opened the journal to a well-worn page near the back, a section filled with Mary's prayers for her children. He tucked the letter deep into the binding, pressing it flat. "Find it when you are safe on the island, Mother," he whispered into the empty room. "Find it and know that I didn't leave you. I stayed for the boy." He stood up, slung his powder horn over his shoulder, and took one last look at the room. He saw the empty cradle, the discarded scraps of the morning meal, and the journal resting on the chest. Into the shadow. Outside, the Narragansett warriors were waiting. They didn't speak as Joshua stepped off the porch. He didn't look back at the cabin. His eyes were fixed on the dark, jagged line of the great swamp. He knew that by tomorrow, the English militia would call him a renegade. He knew that in the history books of the colonies, his name would be a mark of shame. But as he stepped into the trees, disappearing into the hemlocks and the mist, he felt a strange, cold peace. He had left his heart in his mother's book and his strength in his brother's wagon. All that was left of Joshua Teft was a vow to become a ghost, a guardian, and a wall of fire between the world that was ending and the life his son, Peter, was meant to live. The floorboards of the Portsmouth house creaked under a weight that had nothing to do with John's slowing stride. It was the weight of silence. Outside, the Atlantic tapped against the rocky shore of Aquidneck Island, a steady, rhythmic reminder of the distance between this safe harbor and the dark, tangled woods of Kingston. Mary's Hope chest had been delivered that morning by a farmhand who helped the family back in Kingston. He retreated to Aquidneck Island shortly after the Tefts wagon had pulled away from the farm. In the corner of the room, Mary sat by the cooling hearth. Her fingers traced the leather cover of her journal, her thumb hovering over the very page where Joshua's letter lay hidden in the binding, silent and undiscovered. She hadn't slept in 3 days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the great swamp, not as a place of refuge, but as a maw of gray mist and sharpened steel. The secret resolve. John watched her from the shadows of the bed frame. His joints burned, a dull, throbbing ache that spoke of 60 years of felling oaks and hauling stone. He looked at his hands, scarred and thickened by the labor that had built their legacy. They were the hands of a builder, but tonight they felt like the hands of a rescue party. He knew what the townspeople were saying in the market. They called his son a renegade. They whispered the word traitor when they thought John was out of earshot. But John didn't see a traitor. He saw the boy who used to follow him through the rows of corn, the young man who had the loving strength to choose his own path, even when that path led away from his own kind. "He's still my blood," John thought, his jaw tightening. "And I am the one who taught him to stand." The preparation. While Mary stared into the embers, John moved with a ghost's quietness. He reached into the thatch of the roof and pulled down a heavy oilcloth wrap. Inside was his old flintlock, pitted with age but meticulously maintained. He checked his powder horn by the dim moonlight filtering through the diamond-paned window. He didn't pack a bag. A bag would look like a departure. Instead, he tucked a small wedge of dried beef and a handful of lead balls into his coat pockets. He looked at Mary one last time. He wanted to kneel beside her, to tell her that he was going to bring their boy home or die trying to pull him from the fire. But he knew her heart couldn't take the weight of that mission. If he told her, she would beg him to stay for the sake of Samuel and Peter. And if he stayed, he knew he would never sleep again. The midnight departure. John slipped out the back door, the cold salt air hitting his lungs like a shock. His knees popped as he stepped onto the frozen grass, but he didn't falter. He began the long walk toward the ferry crossing. He was a man of 60, walking into the mouth of a war that had already swallowed younger, stronger men. He was walking toward the middle ground, where the English law ended and the Narragansett shadows began. As he disappeared into the darkness of the Portsmouth Road, heading south toward the ferries and the burning woods of Kingston, he whispered a prayer he hadn't said since he was a boy. Lord, let my legs hold out long enough to see his face. Let me be the wall he needs. Behind him, in the silent house, Mary finally opened her journal to the back page, her fingers brushing against the edge of a piece of parchment she hadn't noticed before. Mary didn't write in her journal that night. Instead, she read the words of her brave son Joshua over and over again, until she memorized every word he wrote. Mary sat beside the fire all night. She silently watched the warm flame's shadows dance around the room, her eyes filled of mother's tears, praying her beloved husband was getting some well-deserved sleep, and her son was safely back home in the warm Kingston home.